Okay, I think we're live, and I've never done this before, so I'm just going to try to do it solo and see what happens. But a couple of things have been on my mind as of late, and of course, as always, it's the Council, it's the Vatican Council II, the Second Vatican Council, all these kinds of things. And I even wrote a Substack post on this a couple of days ago called Vatican II as Hyper Object. And an article just came out today on ABC News that I think really encapsulates the conundrum that the church finds itself with this hyper object, this thing that I'm calling a hyper object. Everybody knows, of course, about Vatican II. But here it goes. This is an article by Tim Sullivan on abcnews.com. I will include the link to this in the show notes, but just wanted to kind of get to it. So let's go on over to it. Let's see, does this work? Oh, that's kind of funny. Yeah, let's do this one. Okay. So, a step back in time, America's Catholic Church sees an immense shift toward the old ways. The old ways, the specter of the old ways. And this, of course, is in Madison, Wisconsin. It was the music that changed first. Or maybe that's just when many people at the pale brick Catholic Church in the quiet Wisconsin neighborhood finally began to realize what was happening. Period. Now, I love this sentence because you could have written this sentence in, let's say 1968, 1969, 1970, whenever it is that the new mass took over in your parish, wherever you were. Right. But notice, of course, that this is taking place in 2024, but it is the music that changes first. And I think that that is a tell. The choir director, back to the article, a fixture at St. Maria Goretti for nearly 40 years, was suddenly gone. Contemporary hymns were replaced by music rooted in medieval Europe. The specter of medieval Europe. Ooh, that's bad. So much was changing. Sermons were focusing more on sin and confession. Priests were rarely seen without cassocks. Altar girls, for a time, were banned. At the parish elementary school, students began hearing about abortion and hell. Quote, "It was like a step back in time," said one former parishioner, still so dazed by the tumultuous changes that began in 2021 with a new pastor that he only spoke on condition of anonymity. He's scared, doesn't want to speak on the record. It's not just St. Maria Goretti here. Across the U.S., the Catholic Church is undergoing an immense shift. Generations of Catholics who embraced the modernizing tide sparked by the 1960s in the 1960s by Vatican II are increasingly giving way to religious conservatives who believe the church has been twisted by change with the promise of eternal salvation replaced by guitar masses, parish food pantries, and casual indifference to church doctrine. Okay, so this is what is so fascinating to be Catholic in 2024 because there's this fascinating inversion, right? That we understand revolutions only to take place in one direction. And good morning, President Foxman. Only taking place in one direction, right? So that there's an arc of history, and it is always moving in the direction of progress. And so, what is happening here, according to this article in this parish, St. Maria Goretti in Madison, Wisconsin, should not happen. It can't happen. How could this possibly happen? Okay, and I also want to point out here that the Vatican II sort of specter, as I've talked about in my article, as a hyper object, it kind of looms in the background. Nobody ever really says exactly what it is, right? But what we see here is that it certainly meant a new mass. It certainly meant new music. It certainly meant a new emphasis. It certainly meant a movement away from confession and sin and all of those nasty things. And it was a movement to guitar masses. Now, LOL, of course, guitar masses are as dated as anything as you could possibly imagine, but here we go. Okay, so the shift is this shift is disconcerting here. The shift molded by plummeting church attendance, increasing traditional priests, and growing numbers of young Catholics searching for more orthodoxy has reshaped parishes across the country, leaving them sometimes at odds with Pope Francis and much of the Catholic world. I really want to know what much of the Catholic world means, but later on we'll see in this article the truth, right? That you can only be a part of the church if you're in the church or you go to church. And I think that that's what many of my progressive friends don't quite understand about what is happening. that this is not simply a battle of ideas, it's a battle of practice, right? It's a battle of participation. Yet the changes they have brought are impossible to miss. The progressive priests who dominated the U.S. church in the years after Vatican II are now in their 70s and 80s. And this is really what I want to get into here. Now, remember, the progressive priests that have dominated the church were minted in the pre-conciliar church, right? So much of what they oversaw in their own priesthoods, their own careers, was the dismantling, we might say, the dismantling of that which had been given to them because we are doing a new thing. I love these quotations. The progressive priests, many are retired, some are dead. Younger priests surveys show are far more conservative. They say they're trying to restore what us old guys ruined, said the Reverend John Forliti, 87, a retired Twin Cities priest who fought for civil rights and reforms in Catholic school education. They say they're trying to restore what us old guys ruined. Yes, I think that's pretty accurate. Doug Kessel, an outspoken 72-year-old priest at Blessed Trinity Parish in Cleveland, was blunter. They're just waiting for us to die. Now, in order to have a successful movement or a successful revolution, a successful church, you need to have that sort of most fundamental thing, which is children. You need to have children in order to pass on whatever grand new ideas you have to the next generation. And what folks like Father Kessel and Father Forliti don't seem to understand is that they forgot the first rule. And the first rule is that nothing matters until you can instantiate it into a new generation. And there are none. There are no priests that picked up this mantle. And this is why I think the convulsions that we're all going through right now in the church, especially under Pope Francis, these convulsions are ultimately going to be fruitless because they have no fruit. Continue here. They're just waiting for us to die. That's probably true. That if you do not have anyone to take over the roles, then those roles will ultimately get filled by people who actually want to be there. And what it turns out is that the kind of progressive Vatican II church that they tried to bring into being by fiat wasn't terribly compelling. At least it wasn't compelling to my generation. I'm Gen X. I'm 51, I think. Not terribly compelling to the Gen Xers, and certainly an absolute joke by the boomers' children, the millennials. Now, the subsequent generations, maybe there's a chance, but they are being not treated well, as it were. Anyway, back to the article. At St. Maria Goretti, once steeped in the ethos, yes, excellent, the ethos of Vatican II, many parishioners saw the changes as a requiem. Yes, indeed, a requiem, a song sung at a funeral. And that is true. I really do believe that. And notice the invocation of the ethos of Vatican II. Now, the spirit of Vatican II, that's an old thing. Most of us who've been around Catholic circles have for years heard about the spirit of Vatican II, right? And so this whole notion of Vatican II is such a squishy and difficult thing to tag down. And the conservative folks amongst us will say something to the effect of like, well, the documents are perfectly orthodox. And the progressives will say the Vatican II, that Vatican II started something that has to ultimately be accomplished. And so both the kind of the progressive side of the register and the conservative side of the register, both are arguing from that kind of sense that Vatican II hasn't been fully implemented yet. I disagree. That the documents are just documents. They're words and they're letters, and they're fine. I like them for the most part, right? But the spirit is the thing. The spirit is the thing that is absolutely the consequential force that all of us have lived in since we showed up. At St. Maria Goretti, once steeped in the ethos of Vatican II, many parishioners saw the changes as a requiem. I don't want my daughter to be Catholic, said Christine Hammond, whose family left the parish when the new outlook spilled into the church's school and her daughter's classroom. Not if this is the Roman Catholic Church that is coming. So we've been told over and over and over again, right, that the Second Vatican Council should be seen as the continuity of the Roman Catholic Church, and not as a bit of a disruption. And certainly the pontificates of John Paul II and Benedict XVI were predicated on the idea and bringing about the idea that the Second Vatican Council was a kind of much needed sort of boost in the arm that would kind of make this thing a reality. But I think as we see, if you get outside of the clerics and the teachers and the theologians and the sort of the official people, if you talk to real people, like lay people, right? This is supposed to be the time of the laity. If you talk to real lay people, this is the church that they're talking about, right? She's upset. And look, I'm actually sympathetic to Christine Hammond. I think that she's been sort of taught one thing and all of a sudden, well, maybe it's not. Because again, it's not about the teaching of the documents. It's about the practices that were instituted in the wake of the council. That's the council. It's not, the books. But this is not a simple story because there are many who welcome this new old church. They often stand out in the pews with the men in ties and the women sometimes with the lace head coverings that all but disappeared from American churches more than 50 years ago. Often, at least a couple families will arrive with 4 or 5, even more children, signaling their adherence to the church's ban on contraception, which most American Catholics have long casually ignored. It's absolutely correct, Mr. Sullivan. Here, most people they don't listen to the documents, right? They listen ultimately to what's being told or not, which is what is spoken or not spoken in their respective parishes. It was not until I was, I don't know, 18 or 19 or 20 years old that I had ever heard anything which what I would consider orthodox. And I had to kind of go looking for it. In fact, what we were told is that sin is not really a sin, and mercy is the most important thing, and all of these sorts of things, and all kind of a mesh, a wishy-washy mess of you do you, you do you, right? It's nice to be nice to the nice. Is sort of this church of nice that we talk about here. And so this is what they're reacting to, and I'm actually sympathetic to them because they feel like their church has been stolen from them. But see, this is exactly what the trads will say, that actually the perennial church got stolen from them in some way, shape, or form. Right? These new people who show up in ties and mantillas and have 4 and 5 and even more children, they attend confession regularly and adhere strictly to church teachings. Many yearn for masses that echo with medieval traditions: more Latin, more incense, more Gregorian chants. Guilty as charged. We want this ethereal experience that is different from everything else in our lives, said Ben Rollo, who until recently led St. Maria Goretti's young adult group, which saw membership skyrocket even as the parish shrank amid the turmoil. They are, Rollo said, happily out of touch with a liberal city like Madison, right? This urban monoculture. Madison, of course, is being the university town, which I would imagine is quite progressive in its overall ethos, right? And so you can see a church at one point whose ethos seemed to jibe with that surrounding progressive ethos, and now all of a sudden one is not. And so, which one is the real church? And I again, I want to point out here that I am extremely sympathetic to these folks who are totally ignorant of their patrimony, right? Totally ignorant of everything prior to in the church. Of course, the year zero is the Second Vatican Council. And again, I know I'm beating a dead horse here, but I'm tired of people talking about the Second Vatican Council in terms of the documents, in terms of what was even said in St. Peter's in the 3 years, the 3 sessions in the 62, 63, 64, or 63, 64, 65. I always get those years a little bit wrong, but you get my point. In other words, it didn't matter ultimately what was happening in that building with a bunch of priests, right? What mattered was the thing that was delivered on the ground, right? Nobody cared really what was being said or fought over or squabbled over at the council, right? What they cared about was what was given to them directly in the here, in the now, at the church, in the pews, and ultimately what they were taught in schools. right? So that's really where the council or the spirit or the hyper object of the council ultimately happened. Okay. Okay. So let's continue here. Some in this move, if this movement emerged from anywhere, it might now it might be a now demolished Denver football stadium, Mile High Stadium, and a borrowed military helicopter carrying in Pope John Paul II. And I think this is right. I think this I really give Sullivan credit here because I think he correctly understands that this disconnect between the sort of official church, right, the church that people met in the pews, the church that they met at their respective suburban parishes, all right, was challenged by John Paul II flying into World Youth Day in 1993. I think this is exactly right. And I consider myself part of that movement, right? That the church that John Paul II bore witness to was not the church that I had learned when I was going to school. This was a robust and heroic faith. And what I was getting at a suburban parish and at my Catholic schools was really nothing of the sort. The Pope, whose grandfatherly appearance belied an electric charisma. Oh, that's so true. If you were alive then, you would know exactly what they're talking about here. An electric charisma, and who was beloved both for his kindness and his sternness, confronted an American church shaped by 3 decades of progressive change. If the church is often best known to non-Catholics for its opposition to abortion, it had grown increasingly liberal since Vatican II. Birth control was quietly accepted in many parishes, and confession barely mentioned. Catholic social teaching on poverty suffused churches. Most priests traded in their cassock for plain black shirts with Roman collars. Incense and Latin became increasingly rare. I did not experience incense or Latin until I was in my mid-20s. Just wasn't part of the world that I grew up. And I always remember as a kid watching movies where it was set in a kind of pre-conciliar church, because all movies love the pre-conciliar church because it's so blatant and obvious that it's Catholic, right? I just remember thinking like, oh, that's not what my church looks like at all. Like, I don't know what this is, but it who knows, right? So it was always confounding to me and surprising. But anyway, here we go. Right. So none of the stuff really happened in the pews. It was sort of something that maybe got squabbled over in the newspapers or at universities, but never in the parish. On some issues, John Paul II agreed with these liberal-minded Catholics. He spoke against capital punishment and pushed for workers' rights. He preached relentlessly about forgiveness, the oxygen that purifies the air of hatred. God, I love that line. He forgave his own would-be assassin. But he was also uncompromising on dogma, warning about change and cracking down on liberal theologians. He urged a return to forgotten rituals. If only he had done more of that personally. But anyway, I digress. Catholics are in danger of losing, let's make that a little bit bigger. Catholics are in danger of losing their faith, he told crowds at the final Denver Mass, decrying abortion, drug abuse, and what he called sexual disorders, a barely veiled reference to growing acceptance of gay rights. And I think this article is exactly right. John Paul II was never scared to talk about those kinds of things. And yet, none of the universities, of course, gave a rat's behind. All of the universities, all the big time name brand Catholic schools, all the legacy institutions embraced progressive heterodoxy at the most fundamental level. Right? We know this. This is not anything surprising. In other words, there was a hostile takeover over the span of, let's call it 30 years, in which all Catholic institutions, unless they were explicitly and proudly working in a kind of orthodox circuit, became cannibalized and eaten by the progressive ethos that was decidedly birthed in a strange, interesting way by the Second Vatican Council. Catholics, he says, are in danger of losing their faith. And oh my gosh, let's look at the numbers. The numbers seem to prove that very point. Across the nation, fervent young Catholics listened. Newman centers, which served Catholic university students, became increasingly popular. So did Focus, a traditionalist organization working on American college campuses. Conservative Catholic media grew, particularly the cable TV network EWTN, a prominent voice for increased orthodoxy. Today, conservative Catholics has its own conservative Catholic America has its own constellation of online celebrities aimed at young people. There's Sister Miriam James, an ever-smiling nun in full habit who talks openly about her hard-partying college days. There's Jackie Francois Angel, who speaks in shockingly frank detail about sex, marriage, and Catholicism. There's Mike Schmitz, a movie star, handsome Minnesota priest who exudes kindness while insisting on doctrine. Father Mike's great. If you've seen his Bible in a year, it's fantastic. I think he does a catechism in a year thing too. Fantastic. Recommend it. Even today, surveys show most American Catholics are far from orthodox. Most support abortion rights. The vast majority use birth control. But increasingly, those Catholics are not in church. So I ask you, my audience, what then actually is a Catholic? What does it require to be a Catholic? To have a microphone stuck in your face and say, yes, I'm Catholic. Like what exactly are the requirements? Are there such a thing? Like what's the bar? Because there seems to be a lot of confusion, about that. What kind of tolerance does the church have for, heterodoxy? I don't know. I'm asking questions here. Ha ha ha. I'm asking questions, but I really am. But increasingly, those that I would consider, at least by the documents, by the letter, by the catechism, by the encyclicals, by the thing, would find themselves outside of the Catholic Church, or actually not even physically in church on Sundays. Interesting. In 1970, more than half of America's Catholics said they went to Mass at least once a week. 50% in 1970. By 2022, that had fallen to 17%. Among millennials, the number is just 9%. So what does it mean to be a Catholic? I mean, do you have to go to church? I mean, I thought that was sort of part of the deal. Now, COVID came around and sort of punctured that balloon quite a bit. But nonetheless, here we are, let's call it 15% of people who self-identify as Catholics go to Mass on Sundays. What does it mean to be Catholic? Even as the U.S. Catholic population has jumped to more than 70 million, driven in part by immigration from Latin America, ever fewer Catholics are involved in the church's most important rites. Infant baptisms has fallen. This is incredible. Infant baptisms have fallen from 1.2 million in 1965 to 440,000 in 2021. Now, I would say that of all of the sacraments, the one that is probably least affected by the changes since the council has been baptism. I mean, most people will probably like kind of begrudgingly do, they'll do the baptism thing, but like everything beyond that, like not so much. I mean, I know this, of course, because I teach at a Catholic school, and so baptisms are pretty typical for those that come in self-identifying, but First Communion, my gosh, confession, forget it, confirmation, no way, no how. And then, of course, we get to the big one, which is Catholic marriages. I mean, because where do Catholics come from? Sure, you could say that, importantly, that evangelization is important. It's a part of the commission, right? But really, the best way to ensure that we have more Catholics would be to have Catholics have Catholics. I know it was like a shock, right? Catholics having Catholics, like that's a good way to do it. But we don't really do this. So anyway, we go back to this bit on marriage. It says Catholic marriages have dropped by well over 2/3. Well over 2/3. The shrinking numbers mean that those who remain in the church have outsized influence compared with the overall Catholic population. Now, for those of you in the corner, Paul Vanderklay's side of this little corner, you will know exactly what I'm talking about here because Paul has, I think, correctly seen this in his own CRC denomination, right? That the progressives thought that they had won because they were on the right side of history, right? The problem is that progressives don't have kids, right? And, just playing by the numbers here, that conservatives have kids or traditional minded people have kids. And so, what's up, Raquel? And so, therefore, those who have kids kind of have the future. So demographics are, kind of important. Now, I'm not making a strictly instrumental argument. I don't think you should have kids just so you can like pad the numbers. But if you believe in this thing we call the gospel, if you believe in the Roman Catholic Church, you should very much want, what's up, Aunt? You should very much want, right, the church to continue in the best way to ensure that the Catholic Church continues, or your denomination or confession continues, is to have more children and to explicitly raise them in the church. Now, if you recall, the young woman above says, "I don't want my daughter to be Catholic," and I think she's right. I love that the honesty. Yes, transfigured. It's a live stream. I think she's absolutely right. That she does not want her child to be Catholic. If this is what Catholicism means, well, guess what? Thanks, transfigured. Guess what? This is what Catholicism is. You can't just sort of like sandpaper all away, sandpaper away all the rough spots and still call it the thing. Like, at what point does it cease being Catholicism? Like, what does it mean? Is it an ethnic identifier? Is it a political program first and foremost? I mean, what exactly does it mean? Okay, so we talked about marriage, we talked about baptisms, etc. Let's keep it here. On the national level, uh, uh, conservatives increasingly dominate the the U.S. Catholic Bishops Conference and the Catholic intellectual world. They include everyone from the philanthropist founder of Domino's Pizza to 6 of the 9 U.S. Supreme Court justices. LOL, whatever that means. Then there's the priesthood. Young priests driven by liberal politics and progressive theology, so common in the 60s and 70s. I wonder why. I wonder if it's almost like there's a spirit that took over at the time. And my gosh, what's a spirit? At any rate, so common in the 60s and 70s have all but vanished, said a 2023 report from the Catholic Project of Catholic University based on a survey of more than 3,500 priests. Shocking. Shocking. Okay. Indeed, Rakow. Indeed. All right. So today's young priests, I love this. I love this. Today's young priests are far more likely to believe that the church changed too much after Vatican II, tangling itself up, getting political, tangling itself up in America's rapidly shifting views on everything from women's roles to LGBTQ people. Well, yeah, because the fight's not going to leave you alone, right? Anyway, and this is a quote, "There really aren't very many liberals in the seminaries anymore," said a young, recently ordained Midwestern priest. He spoke on condition of anonymity because of the turmoil that engulfed his parish after he began pressing for more Orthodox services. They wouldn't feel comfortable. And I wonder why. I mean, what must it have been like, for instance, flip it over? What would it have been like to be conservative or traditional in the seminaries of the 60s and the 70s? I wonder if we could figure that sort of stuff out. We can. There's a record. It's clear. They were absolutely chased out of there, right? And so kudos to those guys who hung on. Honestly, thank God. Actually. But a progressive minded, they wouldn't feel comfortable. And I think that's right. Sometimes the shift toward orthodoxy happens slowly. Maybe there's a little more Latin sprinkled into Mass or an occasional reminder to go to confession. Maybe guitars are relegated to Saturday evening services or drop. Notice the Saturday evening services, those are not for kids. Those are for boomers. If you've ever been to a Saturday evening mass, you know that's it's boomer time and it's social hour and it's loud and it's chatty and it's really them, whatever, doing their thing. It is not for people like me. It is certainly not for my own children. It is very much for them. So we don't go. We go somewhere else. But you get my point. Okay, maybe guitars are relegated to Saturday evening services or dropped completely. And sometimes the changes come like a whirlwind, dividing almost like when Vatican II was implemented, or the spirit of Vatican II, a whirlwind, dividing parishes between those thirsting for a more reverent Catholicism and those who feel their spiritual home has been taken from them. You'd leave Mass thinking, "Holy cow, what just happened?" said another ex-parishioner at St. Maria Goretti, whose family eventually left the church, describing the 2021 promotion of a new pastor and a sudden focus on sin and confession. And again, I wish Twitter had existed in 1970 when the other changes happened overnight, wholesale, robbing people's entire social imaginary of the faith that they had grown up in. So again, I'm sort of sympathetic to them, but if I sort of level up and take the high, if you take the sort of the larger view, you realize that the changes are the novelty, not what these nasty conservative traditionalists are trying to quote unquote bring back. And this is a great quote here. Like many former parishioners, he spoke only on condition of anonymity, worried about upsetting friends still at the church. Diocesan clergy did not respond to requests for interviews. Guys, it's almost like a reformation or something happened. "I'm a lifelong Catholic. I grew up going to church every Sunday," he said, "but I'd never seen anything like this." And oh my gosh, that is exactly right. You had never seen this because you grew up in the midst of the revolution and you didn't know it. It's a revolution. The new outlook has spilled across America. In churches from Minnesota to California, parishioners have protested changes introduced by new conservative priests. In Cincinnati, it came when the new priest abandoned gospel music and African drumming. In small town North Carolina, it was an intense focus on Latin. In East Texas, it was right wing bishop forced out by the Vatican after accusing Pope Francis of undermining church teaching. Right. So, Anthony, I'm reading an article by this guy named Tim Sullivan, I think it is. Never find my but Tim Sullivan on abcnews.com. It's really good. I recommend it. I'll put a link after I'm done with the show. Sorry about that, Anthony. All right. So let me find my spot. This is bad YouTube. I know. I'm sorry. Let's see. Accusing, but so all the spillage, right, going out is like a lab leak of like old-fashioned Catholicism. Like, I thought we had killed that. Maybe not, because remember, having kids kind of matters. And you can have kids in two ways, right? You can have kids, actual kids, physical kids, right? Husband, wife, that's how it happens. Or you can have kids by evangelization, right? So I've always loved the fact that the Catholic Church has decided, in its wisdom, perhaps, in her wisdom, that it would be too easy if we could have faithful people become priests who could then get married and have, a bunch of children. No, we're going to take that off the table just for a minute. We're going to make Catholics replicate themselves through evangelization and through the passing on of the faith from generation to generation to generation. So it's kind of a cool move. More on that, maybe in another live stream or something. But anyway, we're talking about this lab leak here. Each can seem like one more skirmish in the cultural and political battles tearing at America. But the movement, whether called conservative or orthodox or traditionalist or authentic, can be hard to define. And I do appreciate that. I think that's right, because conservative and orthodox and traditionalist and authentic are all slight different takes on what is going on. Okay, but very good. It ranges from Catholics who want more incense to Latin Mass adherents who have brought back ancient prayers that mention the perfidious Jews. This is so funny. There are right-wing survivalists, celebrity exorcists, environmentalists, and a handful of quasi-socialists. I think this is true. It really is kind of capturing the Catholic social imaginary in 2024, and you see this all over the place. So I think this is pretty good. There's the Catholic news outlet railing against the Vatican's wicked entourage, and the small-town Wisconsin priest who traces COVID-19 to a century-old prophecy and warns of looming dictatorship. Reading the signs of the times. There's the recent Catholic prayer for Trump, a $1,000 a plate dinner at the former president's Mar-a-Lago resort featuring a string of conspiracy theorists. Or maybe just a string of people who support what Trump wants to do. I don't know why it has to be a conspiracy theorist, but anyway, I digress. Yet the Orthodox movement can also seem like a tangle of forgiveness and rigidity. There's that word, is Pope Francis's favorite word, right? Is rigidity. Anyway, we keep going, where insistence on mercy and kindness mingle with warnings of eternity in hell. Looming over the American divide is Pope Francis, who has pushed the global church to be more inclusive unless you're a conservative, even as he toes the line on most dogma. Interesting, towing the line. Okay. The Orthodox movement has watched him nervously from the first days of his papacy, angered by his more liberal views on issues like gay relationships and divorce. Some reject him entirely. And the Pope clearly worries about America. No, actually, I think the Pope just doesn't like America, but maybe I'm wrong. The U.S. church has a very strong reactionary attitude, he told a group of Jesuits last year. Being backward-looking is useless. Indietrismo, here we go, right? Reactionary attitude. And I really... I don't like that word reactionary, because it gives the lie that whoever frames the discussion as normal can just call all of his enemies reactionary. But here we are. You can find this new vision of Catholic America at Latin Masses in Milwaukee, the pews crowded with worshipers, even at noon on a weekday. Now, that sounds like a good thing. I would think you would like a lot of people in the pews on a church, even on weekdays at noon. Like, I would think you would want that. It's in conferences held in California wine. Oh, the Napa Institute rears its ugly head. I love the cryptic reference here. At reinvigorated parishes in Tennessee and prayer groups in Washington, D.C. And it's at a little Kansas college built high on a bluff above the Missouri River. And we're going to talk about Benedictine College. And oh my gosh, these are young kids who actually care about the church and try to listen and adhere to its teachings. This is just a shocking development. Thank God. Go on, St. Benedict. what is it? Of course, I'm a fan of St. Benedict, but this is Benedictine College. So, like, let's go. This is great. Okay. And of course, there are excesses, like there are excesses everywhere. We're going to skip on to that. Blah, 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 blah. Okay. Blah, 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 blah. Okay, I'm good. Okay, here. For decades, the pews at St. Maria, we're back to St. Maria Goretti, were filled with the families of plumbers, engineers, and professors from the University of Wisconsin, just a couple of miles up the road. The church is a well-kept island of Catholicism tucked into the leafy residential streets of one of America's most liberal cities. Like so many other parishes, it had been shaped by the ideals of the 60s and 70s. Poverty and social justice became tightly interwoven with sermons and parish life. Gay people felt welcome. Some of the church's moral absolutes, like the contraception ban, became forgotten dogmas, those pesky little things that require things of us. We used to talk about sacrifice, right? And so, can you have a faith community and a faith commitment without sacrifice? It would appear that when you try to do that, that sacrifice doesn't yield fruit. When you don't make the sacrifices that a church demands of you, then it would appear that you don't have children, and your children don't give a rat's behind about whatever this thing you do on Sundays. Changes arrived in 2003 with a new bishop, and of course, there's the evil conservative bishop going along here, and it's pretty classic. Talk of Latin and sin and confession. Like, honestly, if you want to tick off a liberal boomer, just like talk about confession, talk about sin, and my gosh, Latin. Latin is just, it's just the worst. At any rate, a lot of us were like, hey, more confessions, sweet, said Rouleau, who ran the parish young adult group, better music. But the parish, which in mid-2023 became part of a two-church pastorate, looming behind all of this is the church crisis. And that's the one thing that I think is kind of missing from this. And the church crisis is ultimately one about authority and salience. And the draining of church authority and salience was supercharged, right, by this era of the spotlight, right? I'm talking about the Boston Globe thing. What nobody wants to talk about, liberals or conservatives, traditionalists or not, nobody really seems to want to take ownership over the fact that the real reason nobody goes to church anymore is because the church has zero moral credibility. And it continues to have zero moral credibility because the people who both perpetuated these crimes that cry out to heaven, the abuse of children and the abuse of the vulnerable and the abuse of the innocent, heads have not rolled. That's it. Heads have not rolled. Now, I'm very sympathetic to this desire on their part to have a more reverent Mass, to return to these traditions that I think are solid and offer a kind of structure with which to hang my exhausted spirit. I long for that. I don't want a church that I have to recreate every day. That's part of the joys, right, of being Catholic, is I don't have to recreate the wheel every day. I can give myself over to it. Yes, but finally, Anthony, I'll send it to you. Yet, finally, none of that matters. Latin masses don't matter. Reverence, Gregorian chant, sin, none of that will matter in terms of growing the church, I should say, until the corruption is addressed, root and branch. There it is. So all of this sort of stuff is just going to be culture war stuff. But the church will not have her witness until she deals with it. And the fact, of course, that the church continues to have people like Rupnik have a free pass. That's right. That's right on you, Pope Francis. Right? It grieves me. It really grieves me that you protect that alleged predator. For decades, many traditional Catholics have wondered if the church would and perhaps should shrink to a smaller, more faithful core. In ways, that's how St. Maria Goretti looks today. The 6:30 a.m. Friday Mass, Rollo says, is increasingly popular among young people. But once packed Sunday Masses now have empty pews. Donations are down. School enrollment plunged. Oh yeah, no doubt. Because to be really Catholic here now in 2024 is to be countercultural. You have to expect that. You have preached a cozy gospel, a kind of Catholic version of a prosperity gospel, really, in the end. Prosperity in different ways than that guy down in Houston, but it's a prosperity gospel. Right? It is a cozy, bougie Catholicism that was preached for a really long time. And at some point, you're going to A/B test this. You're going to say the world of the church, and if the church kind of like looks a little bit like the world, I'll just take the real thing. Or I'll just take, I don't want to have like the world light, because that's sort of what the church has been preaching, since we've gone here. We continue here. Some who have left have gone to more liberal parishes. Some joined Protestant churches. Some abandoned religion entirely. And I think that's going to be the bulk of them, those that abandon religion entirely. I'm not Catholic anymore, said Hammond, the woman who left when the church's school began to change. Not even a little bit. And I would say she probably never was. But Emerson insists that Catholic Church's critics will be proven wrong. How many have laughed at the church announcing that she was passé, that her days were over, and that they would bury her, he said in a 2021 Mass. The church, he said, has buried every one of her undertakers. And that's a great tag, and that's a great article. I highly recommend it. I wanted to talk just a quick, I did write up, I think the elephant in the room is Vatican II. Right. And, I tweet about this all the time. I wrote a Substack article about this the other day on the church. So the council, the Second Vatican Council, or Vatican II, as a hyper object. And it's this huge, massive thing that nobody really kind of wants to deal with. Here's the article here, just quoting here, I'm quoting myself. This sounds kind of funny. A hyperobject is an idea that is so massive, so all-encompassing, so spread out that you can't quite encompass it, but you know it's real. And whether I want to admit it or not, Vatican II is real. It's a hyperobject, right? And it is something that we have to deal with. And it's not going away. All right, I've prattled on long enough. It's a great article. I don't know. So let me do this. Oh yeah, I can do this. Copy. I can put this. Paste it in the comments. Oh, there it is. Good. There, I've pasted the article in the comments, so you can grab at it. Anthony, you can grab it right now if you want. I can email it to you. Otherwise, look, I plan on doing some more of these. I will have some branding that Chad the alcoholic, a good friend of mine from TLC, has provided for me. And until then, everybody have a great one. We'll talk soon. Cheers. God bless.